Hello, my name is Carl Dolnick Jr. I'm an elder law attorney in the state of Wisconsin. In my practice, I emphasize estate planning for my clients. That is, helping them plan for how they will use their money in the future. Many clients over the years set aside money for various purposes: a new home, vacation, college education for their children, automobile, and so on. And they do this because they know the money will be there when they need it. However, there is a certain event that all of us will face in our lives that very few people plan for, and that is our funerals. Many people do not realize that if they do not plan, then their family will be forced to, in the midst of their grieving, plan for their funeral. The Irrevocable Funeral Trust is an exceptional and flexible tool that families can use to help prepay their funeral expenses. And at the same time, the Irrevocable Funeral Trust is also an exceptional way to protect your assets from the nursing home should you be faced with extraordinary medical expenses or nursing home confinement. Healthcare costs have risen dramatically over the past decade. After working an entire lifetime, many retirees can be devastated by the cost of health care or the potential for nursing home confinement. Many individuals do end up being confined to a nursing home and are forced to utilize all of their assets, all of their money for payment of their nursing home expenses. Medicaid is a program that helps individuals pay for their nursing home costs if they meet certain criteria. Well, what is Medicaid? Medicaid is a government-funded program, an insurance program, that is set up by both the federal and state governments who fund and manage the program. The rules for counting income and resources vary from state to state. However, the federal government sets the criteria, and the states may make no rules that are more stringent or more restrictive than the federal rules. A married couple may protect their home and a minimum of $50,000 with an upward limit of $101,640 that can be protected. A single person or a married couple where both spouses are confined to the nursing home can protect only $2,000 each. Everything else they have must be used for paying their nursing home expenses. If someone's assets are more than the state limit, then they must spend down their assets, which means utilizing all of their savings and checking accounts, spending their retirement accounts, spending down their savings bonds and mutual funds, as well as any revocable living trust that they have. The funds from there must be spent as well before an individual can be eligible for medical assistance. It is important for clients to ensure that they protect their assets and still become eligible for medical assistance. The Deficit Reduction Act of 2005, effective February 8, 2006 for Medicaid purposes, allows states to look back 5 years or 60 months at any transfers of assets during that period if an individual applies for medical assistance. Any transfers within that time period will be included when determining whether or not an individual meets the asset test for medical assistance. However, transfers to an irrevocable funeral trust are exempt and are not subject to the 5-year look-back rule. Therefore, many clients use the concept of the irrevocable funeral trust to shelter certain of their funds while at the same time providing those funds for payment of their funeral expenses when they pass away. These transfers, because the Irrevocable Funeral Trust, or IFT, is an exempt asset, are not subject to the 5-year rule. And consequently, if the Irrevocable Funeral Trust meets the Medicaid requirements, the asset will be 100% protected. The Medicaid rules state that for an irrevocable funeral trust to be considered an exempt asset, it must meet two criteria. First, it must be irrevocable, and secondly, it must state that the funds in the trust can only be used for payment of burial expenses. If it meets these two requirements, then the transfer to the irrevocable funeral trust is not considered a divestment, and the amount held in the funeral trust will not be considered when determining whether or not the individual applicant is eligible for medical assistance. Because the irrevocable funeral trust is an exempt asset and the 5-year look-back period does not apply, this allows us to use the irrevocable funeral trust in both pre-need planning, that is planning for your future, and imminent crisis planning, that is you're faced with going into a nursing home in the near future and we need to take immediate steps to protect your assets. In either circumstance, a transfer to the irrevocable funeral trust will not create a look-back period and will not make the individual ineligible for medical assistance. Furthermore, the Deficit Reduction Act allows the individual to not only prepay their own funeral expenses, but also allows an individual, a parent, to prepay the funeral expenses of their children. Thus, an irrevocable funeral trust can be established and funded for each one of your children, and the money that you place into these funeral trusts for your children will not be considered a divestment and will not be counted when determining whether or not you are eligible for medical assistance.